Welcome to the Disagreement Podcast. Very excited to have you both. This is our first podcast with two therapists, so very excited for that. Ryan, I would love for you to start us off. What is gentle parenting? Let's just flesh it out to start.
Gentle parenting is the term that just took off on TikTok, and then it just blossomed from there. It just kind of fits the best of both of the worlds of the spectrum of parenting. A big piece of it is going to be high expectation, making sure you kind of kids know what to expect and what is expected of them. That's kind of a piece of it. I think the bigger pieces of it are that connection and attachment, and understanding that that relationship is a big piece of parenting and children doing well. And if I had to say one more, it's hard because I think those are the two kind of umbrella terms that kind of fit it all. But I'm just going to stick it at those two.
I'm going to throw in feelings, like acknowledging feelings, being attuned to feelings, exploring feelings, right? There's a term, chasing the why. I feel like that is central to the philosophy. And so, Lori, you are a therapist for adults. You see gentle parents in your practice frequently. How is it working out for them? How is gentle parenting working out for the adults and the kids? And what are some of your concerns when you think about this movement?
Well, first of all, I agree with Ryan about the tenets of how we should raise our kids. I think with respect, with clear expectations. I think that how we deliver that has gotten a little bit distorted on social media. And so when we talk about gentle parenting, I think that some people misinterpret that to think I should never displease my child. I want to make sure that my child is happy and likes me at all times. My child should not experience any discomfort. And that is not what gentle parenting, I mean, again, you can use whatever term. I think people are having a backlash against authoritarian parenting, which didn't really take into account the humanity of the child. It was kind of like a dictatorship. It was this is what it is. I'm not going to explain why. You just do this. And I think that it left a lot of kids feeling unseen, unheard. It didn't really do a lot for the relationship with their parents. So they grew up, they came to therapy, and they had a lot of complaints about their childhoods. So then those people had kids and they said, I want to do it differently. And then the pendulum swung in a completely different direction, too far. And that's where I think people are starting to get confused.
I'd like to start us by talking about feelings and the relationship between the way we parent and the way we tend and are attuned to our kids' feelings. Because this, I think, is in many ways sort of center of the bullseye. I think there's a spectrum. Whenever a child has a feeling, there's a spectrum of harm, right? On one end, there is real deep harm, emotional trauma. They broke their leg. And on the other end, there's like, I want a different color sippy cup and I'm upset with the color of my sippy cup, right? How do we think about when to be attuned to the feelings and when not to be?
So let's just talk about the emotions. I think one of the things with gentle parenting is I think people think that they have to be on all the time, and they have to be like the perfect parent. And this, I think, gentle parenting is like this aspirational perfect thing, but it's just not. It's not realistic, because we are humans and we are going to have our own experiences and feelings. And I have a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old at home. So as much as I coach and try to teach about gentle parenting, there are absolutely moments that I kind of lose my own stuff, right? I think the goal is, to aim for like being good enough. 60% of the time we are on point. Yes, it would be great to be able to like have that, be fully on every time that they have a problem with a sippy cup. But there's going to be times where it's like I'm trying to also feed the baby and I'm trying to do the dishes and I don't have the time right now.
Okay, this is an important distinction. Lori, is it great to be deeply emotionally attuned for the sippy cup? Or should we just be sort of like what I would call strategically indifferent? Like this is going to, we have 47 different moments of resistance and indignity. And yes, we should tend to some of them in the sort of gentle parenting style of communing with feelings, but most of them we just got to keep it moving, right? Like, so how do you think about, like, is it good? Like, when is it good to commune, and when should we potentially just keep it moving?
It's interesting. I wrote this piece more than 10 years ago now called How to Land Your Kid in Therapy. And I thought that it would help change the way that parents saw their role in, the pendulum swinging too far to this side of validating every single feeling that a child has and stopping everything and making them the center of the universe. And it really hasn't. In fact, I think if anything, it has gotten worse. So the people that I interviewed for that piece, those examples still persist today, where I was talking to a preschool teacher, and she was saying that at the sign-in sheet, you're signing your kid in, your kid runs off to play, your kid is there's some other kid who like took the truck that your kid grabbed, right? And so now they're having a little thing about it, and the other kid says, "Oh, well, you can have this like crappy little truck instead." And your kid was okay with that. Your kid adjusted to that situation. And the parent says, "Oh no, that's not fair. Little Johnny had that truck and little Joey took it from him. What are you teaching these kids?" And the preschool teacher said, "Look, we do teach them not to grab. We do teach them how to behave, but sometimes things are not going to go their way." And the fact that this kid was resilient, now if that happened all the time and the kid just gave in, okay, that's a problem. But the fact is, this kid, the situation changed, the kid adjusted. That's great. You want your kid to be able to do that. But at the time, I remember there was so much pressure from the culture around, especially in public. Your kid is having a feeling and you don't attune to that feeling and you say, "No, cut it out." Everyone thinks you're a terrible parent for saying, "Hey, cut that out," as opposed to, "Oh, you really wanted that cookie. I'm so sorry you can't have that cookie. I know you're having feelings about the cookie." Sometimes just you can't have the cookie.
I don't think that there's a problem with if your child is upset, using Lori's example of not having a cookie, I don't think there's anything wrong with engaging with them in that conversation and talking to them about the feelings that they're having about having the cookie, right? Again, all the caveats of, do I have time? What else is going on in the world and all of that. And there's also nothing wrong if you are really busy and you can't engage in it in that moment, moving on. I think, you know, if it's about the cookie, we have to also separate the feeling from the behavior. Just because we're talking about the cookie doesn't mean you're going to get it. And we're still able to teach them about the disappointment of not having a cookie by having that conversation with them. So even small interactions like that can have really good, results in the long term.
I think we have to define what good is, though, because I actually don't think it's good to sit there with your kid and say, "Tell me about the feelings you're having about not having the cookie." I think that you can validate their experience and say, "I know you really want the cookie, but you're not going to have it right now because dinner is about to happen." Done. That conversation is over, right? You validated their experience. You said, "I know you really want it, and we're about to have dinner, so you're going to have it after, or you're not going to have it today," or whatever the decision is. And I think that that is what makes kids feel safe. They need a pilot who knows how to get the plane to where it's supposed to go. And so sometimes it's just, this is what we're doing.
I want to put a pin in that for a second, Lori, because I think there is a real discomfort with authority and hierarchy and control within the gentle parenting movement that I would love to. I think we should really dig into. I want to stay here on when to commune and when not to commune. 2 days ago, there was an ice cream truck at the playground, and my daughter wanted the Ninja Turtle ice cream thing, and we waited in line for 10 minutes, and then no Ninja Turtle. They were out of it, right? And so now all of a sudden she's starting to become a little more dysregulated. She's 4, right? And I think that the important thing I want to push on and get your take on is that actually the way in which we decide to acknowledge her feelings in that moment can actually escalate or de-escalate them. I think if I said to her, "Hey there, buddy," sigh, you know what? I too recently had a dessert that was on the menu that I really wanted. And then, the waiter came and said they didn't have it. And I was forced to have the creme brulee instead of the lava cake that I really wanted, the lava cake. And, these things haven't, there's two things that they do oftentimes. And I've seen, and one, they can escalate the feelings because now you're in a feelings world and you're starting to like steep in feelings and you're starting to like sit in them. And so the feelings start to come out. The other thing is, I think that often maximizes harm for the kid. What is often best for the kid is to be like, all right, pick one or don't. If you don't want one, fine, we'll go back to the playground. And if you want to go home, we'll go home. But like, that's it. And
Can I interrupt you there and ask you what is what is so problematic about the kid having big feelings?
there's nothing problematic, but again, 47 times a day, they're not big. When, like, in most moments, to me, it seems that actually being not acknowledging and communing feelings. It's fine to just say, "Hey, that's a bummer," and that, but like not doing the full gentle scripting is preferable because if when you do the gentle scripting, it often will cause an escalation and it often then creates more harm because then you're in a power struggle. Anyway,
I think I have 2 points, I think. Going back to the question you first asked me when you said, "What are the tenets of gentle parenting?" And that as much of it is about parents doing their own work. Because I think one of the biggest reason like, when I hear us talking about these big feelings, I know a lot of parents, they really struggle when their kids are feeling these big feelings because many of them were told, "Stuff it, don't deal with it, I'm not gonna deal with it," and sent to their room or whatever because of it. So, that discomfort that a lot of parents feel, I think also plays into this, but I also wanna kinda go back to, what Lori said and also kinda what you said there, but in these moments, a validating, emotional, and attuned statement that can be on a wide spectrum. It can be, "Hey, dude, I get it. You're really sad because you didn't have the ice cream, and I understand, and I've had that too, and it really stinks. Let's figure out what we can do instead," right? And we can go into that super in the weeds comment, which I can think can be really effective and helpful for kids. At the same time, it might be, "Dude, you can't have the cookie. It's almost time for dinner. I understand you're sad about it. We got to keep going." That can also be an attuned statement. It doesn't have, like, when we think of gentle parenting, again, it's that idea that we have in our mind that we have to be always on and it has to be super in depth and engaged, but it doesn't have to be.
Lori, let's talk about what like what is your thinking around like parents and their relationship to authority and how they think about being in charge and hierarchy and creating respect for their authority, because it seems like a lot of parents are quite uncomfortable with these hierarchies or thinking about being in charge and oftentimes, you know err on the side of like being democratic and, to your point, having choice. Like what are you seeing this discomfort and where does it come from?
Yeah. Well, first of all, parenting isn't a democracy, but it's also not a dictatorship. It's relational. And I think that what people are wanting is to have this relationality with their kids, but you're still in charge. So it's both of those things. And so you're not just dictating to your kids. It's not because I said so. It's, hey, we're teaching them about the world. Our real role is to teach our kids so that they can go out into the world and function well. And so we're giving them tools, and they learn that through their interactions with us. So if we, I like to talk about, it used to be that there was like a fishbowl, like there was this very constrained little place where your kids could be, and they had no room for anything. And then we reacted to that by giving them an ocean. And now there's no boundaries, no walls, no anything. And they don't feel safe because they're not ready yet. They're too young. They don't know how to be out in the ocean yet. So, what we want to do is we want to give them an aquarium. So, The issue, we keep using these terms, and I think the terms drive me a little bit bananas because I think that what we're trying to do is we are trying to raise humans to function in the world and to have all of the tools, and that means the emotional tools, the social tools, the cognitive tools, the ability to deal with friction in their lives. It's how do we, in a consistent way, offer them the kinds of experiences that will help them grow into those people. So it's not about what you do in any one moment. It's about a consistent way of relating to them. And so it's not gentle or not gentle. It's not authoritarian or not authoritarian. It's just this is what mom and dad or whoever is raising you, this is how they are with me, and I know what to expect with them.
Ryan, you're nodding your head. So it seems like that there's no major disagreement
No, I
there.
think that's exactly what we're needing to do. Is there that consistency is important. Consistency can look different for people, right? So it can be a very consistent statement to be like, let's talk about the ice cream, versus also it can be very consistent to say, hey, we can't have the ice cream today. I get you're sad about it, and let's move on. Both of those responses, if done on a normal basis, are consistent responses.
Well, but I would disagree with how much we talk about the ice cream. So I think that what you're seeing on social media today is this, and all the Reddit threads, is you have to really get into the feelings and name the feelings and do all of that. And and I used to believe when my child was young that that was what I was supposed to do. And what I found was that it did not seem as effective as validating the feeling and then moving on. And when I started seeing all these people in their 20s, so as I was raising him when he was younger, I was seeing all these people come who were college age or in their early 20s or even in their later 20s, and they'd say things like, my parent is my best friend, and they helped me through everything, and when I didn't get into the school play, they helped with that, and when I was having a feeling about this, and yet I feel empty, or I can't commit to things, or I don't know how to make decisions for myself, or I don't have a direction. And I think that what happened was the kids were not really allowed to experience discomfort. And I think what Ryan said earlier was so on point about really understanding why we as parents are so uncomfortable with our kids' feelings. So we do one of two things: we either shut them down or we go overboard and analyze them to death. And so it used to be that parents would say things like, a kid would say, like, I'm sad about this. And they would say, oh, let's go get some ice cream. Like they never talked about it at all. Or it would be, I'm really mad about this. And they'd say, oh, come on. Why are you mad about that? They would just shut it
Right.
down. Or I'm worried about this. Oh, don't be worried. It's going to be okay. So they would not be able to just sit with the child's feelings. But now what we do is we just talk about them so much that the kids don't know how to
Can you
recover
help
from
me
a
with something
feeling.
there? Or just help me understand it a little bit better, because I hear two things there. There's one, which is the validating of the feeling of saying, you didn't get the part, man, that really stinks. I get it, and you're sad, and living with them in that, versus that like helicopter parenting of, or lawnmower. Let's get in there. I'm going to talk to the person. I'm going to get to you, make sure you get it. Let's go figure this out. Right? Like those are two separate things. I think, are they not?
Oh, definitely. Yes. I'm saying we should validate the feeling and say, yeah, I know it's really disappointing not to get the part in the school play. I know you're really sad about it. And then just stop talking. We don't have to go on and excavate and dig and get into that. Let's see what they say. Because your child will probably say something that has to do with resiliency.
Right.
So let's take that example. You say to them, hey, I know you're really sad about not getting the part. That's really hard. Stop talking. You have to ask yourself as a parent, why am I talking? So let's say you stop talking right at that moment and you're there, you're present, you're sitting in this sadness with your child. Your child will probably not go on and on. They might say, oh, it was really unfair and I was really sad. And you can nod, you can be there. And then 2 minutes later, they might be like, yeah, but maybe I'll get the next one. Or, like they'll come up with that. They'll come up with, or they'll just go do something else and they're done. They're over it. They're fine. When we start really digging and going on, and that's the thing where we're seeing on TikTok, these people, and they use this such a condescending tone with the kid. Like, oh, I understand. I mean, these are the models that
Yeah.
parents are getting on TikTok. And I think it's so infantilizing to
Yes.
the child.
I think I would add something onto that. I think what you say is absolutely on point, especially for your older kids. If a kid's coming home and they're like, somebody was mean to me, right? Um, in that moment, we can live with those feelings, and then we can use that silence, and we can allow them to try and solve their own problem, which I think is, I'm hearing that's what you're saying. I think that that's a great thing because it allows them to try and work through it and solve it and figure out the answers. I think as kids get younger, we do have to be a little bit more involved in that because they don't have any of these coping skills. They're basically borrowing ours. So for
Right.
a like a 3-year-old, we might be like, they're mean to you. What do you think we can do about that? And if they can't come up with anything, we might be like, well, what if we try this, right? That way we like the younger kids are just going to require a little bit more of that parent input.
But Ryan, that's different. I 100% agree with that. What's different is a lot of what people are learning through these parenting people who are doing that whole, oh no, they were mean to you. That must hurt so much. When I was young, somebody hurt me too. And I know what that feels like. That is not helpful to your kid. What is helpful is exactly what you said is, oh, that must be really hard. What do you
Yeah,
think you
I
can
think
do about
yeah.
it? And they might come up with ideas, or then you might suggest something, but now you're helping them with some kinds of tools, and you're not handling with them. You're not, I mean, again, bullying is different from some kid didn't sit with you at lunch. So let's just clarify, because
Yes.
bullying you do have to get involved with. But let's say that someone didn't share their lunch or sit with them or whatever happened. um, you can help them come up with solutions and problem solve. You don't call the other parent, which is what some parents would do, and say, your kid did this, right? How do we solve this? Our kids are having a problem. Can we help them solve it? Not for something like that. Bullying is a completely
I
different thing.
think another theme there is there has to be some authenticity in all of this, right? Like you can't go on and watch your favorite person on TikTok, YouTube, whatever, and be like, that's who I'm going to sound like. You're not going to sound like Mr. Rogers. And you
Well,
shouldn't if that's not your personality. You need to sound like you as a parent.
But Mr. Rogers was so much more moderate than these people that we're seeing on TikTok. So Mr. Rogers was very clear. It was perfect. It's exactly what we're talking about, which is you give them the aquarium, you validate their feelings, you also give them structure, and we're not going to sort of sit there and that we're going to problem solve, we're going to identify the feeling, and we're going to move on. That is not what people are seeing on TikTok nowadays.
Right. I love Mr. Rogers. But I think the thing is, people see people doing this on social media and they're like, that's how I need to sound. Right. I use Mr. Rogers as an example, but it could be whoever you see and they talk to their kid like that. And you're like, ah, okay. So now I have to mimic that. And it just sounds and feels fake. And yes, it infantilizes
But
children.
But I also feel like the people who are doing it on TikTok, like I feel sorry for their children, because because I do not think, as a therapist and as people seeing these people as they grow into their adolescence and then their young adulthood, I do not think that that is helpful for them, because these people are coming and saying, my parents did that and it did not serve me. At the time it felt great, but I'm seeing that it did not serve me.
let's stay here for a second on the vibe, the aesthetic of gentle parenting, because this concept of gentleness, like I find it deeply problematic. Like we are gentle with things that are fragile. Like we treat things gently if we think they might break. And so the entire discourse around gentleness, and again, there's lots of other, there's peaceful, but like there is just a gentleness to this aesthetic that to me, um, does a lot of harm, because it really treats kids as if they are fragile. And the more you treat kids as as fragile beings, the more they are going to be fragile. And we obviously see some issues with young people today uh, in this vein. So either of you would love your thoughts on that, because I don't know why we use the word gentle anymore.
Mm.
Like, I know, Ryan, that it's like that was that was the the brand that worked for people, but like, shouldn't we discard it? Like, isn't it horrible? I don't
I
know.
wish we could just call it parenting, to be honest, you know? I
Yes.
it's sad that that's the one that took off because it causes problems in both sides of it. And the side that you're saying where, we treat people and children like they are breakable, but also in the sense that it really kind of turns off people on that, more intense side of the spectrum because they're so used to this harsh parenting that they hear gentle and they immediately think permissive. So it does cause harm. I wish that I had the power to change that. I just don't.
Let's be clear that harsh parenting is very dangerous for kids. So, I think that people use the word gentle to differentiate from what a lot of people also come to therapy for, which is my parents were critical, insulting, minimizing, yelled all the time, bullied me, um, you know, manipulated me, you name it. So harsh parenting is what I think we think of when we think of kids who come to therapy, that their parenting was too harsh. So people are very wary of making sure that they are not doing that to their children. But gentle parenting also can be kind of a misnomer. So I agree, we should just call it parenting and teach parents here is a way to relate to your children that will be very helpful for them and in which you will be doing your job as a parent.
I want to talk about punishments, because to me that is, I think for most parents, that is what they think about and struggle with. And to start, Ryan, can you give us your version of your approach to punishment and how you think about consequences, punishment, and the entire sort of nature of discipline within your gentle system?
I generally try to avoid the idea of punishment whenever possible. I it generally is just not as effective, especially in the long term. It's the same reason talking about a much different topic that our prison system has such a high recidivism rate, right? Because punishment by itself just it doesn't do much. You throw them in halfway houses where they're actually working on stuff, it tends to work much better. So I think there's still going to be people that use it, like timeouts and stuff like that. I think if you are going to use that, and this is something I try to tell parents, that should be about 10% about what you do, maybe less. And the rest of it needs to be a much more comprehensive kind of why are we doing this? What can we teach them? How can we teach them to do things differently? What skills do they need to learn here? That way we're building skills rather than just punishing what we don't want.
Yeah, when we talk about punishment, we're talking about how do we help our kids to understand and learn something from that experience. So a lot of times, I think in other generations, people would say, go to your room and think about that. Well, I think that's hilarious. What are they supposed to do? All they're getting, the message they're getting is, I'm bad. I hate my parents. I hate what they're doing. They don't understand. They never heard why I did what I did. They don't understand the need. Kids' behaviors are unspoken requests. So when you think about it, it's kind of like all feelings are welcome, all behaviors are not. And so that's sort of a long time tenet of parenting is that you can have your feeling, but what do you do with it? You can be angry. That's okay. Because parents are like, don't be angry. You can be angry, but then what do you do with the anger? Do you, you know, do you hit your sibling? No. Do you, like, do you have a tantrum? No. So what do you do with the anger? Can we figure out a more productive way of dealing with that anger? So when your kid does something, I think that they shouldn't be doing. What we're talking about is degree. So I would really want to know sort of, hey, what you did is not okay. Can we talk about this for a second? Or maybe they're too dysregulated. So what you did is not okay. So we're going to take a minute, and you don't isolate them. It's not like you're sending them to jail. It's like, let's take a minute and then let's understand this better. And so you're teaching them something, and parents say, well, what is the consequence for that? Well, the first time they do it, I might say, so let's figure out what you can do next time instead. Now, if they keep doing the thing and they're not learning anything from it, we might think about what would a consequence be that makes sense for the behavior. So if you hit your sibling, you're not going to be able to play with your sibling in this way, or I'm going to have to supervise, or whatever it is. But you have to come up with something that makes sense. It's not an unrelated
Okay.
consequence.
So you two are, I think, in complete agreement here. I have a potential disagreement that I want to run by you, because if a organic consequence is available, that is a beautiful thing. If the kid won't, and my daughter won't put away her markers, okay, at a certain point, I'm going to take those markers and you won't have access to them. Oftentimes there's like the ball, or like if they're throwing the ball and they hit you take away the ball. So I agree that the first like order of parenting, like an approach to discipline is like, if is there an organic, I think it's called natural consequence, that is really like in line, and those are the best. But here's the scenario that I think parents with young kids find themselves all the time, many times a day, right? So, and this was yesterday, trying to get my daughter out to camp and my son to an appointment, right? And he had to be there at the time. If we're 15 minutes late, I had to reschedule. Okay. She's looking for her second shoe. Can't find the shoe. Shocker, right? Um, and so, like, hey, look, at a certain point, you have about 30 seconds. If you can't, you're going to have to wear different shoes, right? And now all of a sudden, we are in a zero sum duel. We're in a situation where we need to get out the door. What do I do? Like, truly, what do I do if there isn't some? Because, like, what is the organic consequence? What is the natural consequence for the fact that she refuses to wear a different pair of shoes? I'm like, I've put three options in front of her. She wants the other shoe. She's not leaving. We can't get out the door. Um, like, there's a lot of these scenarios where I don't understand what an organic or natural consequence could look like.
I
So that's my question to both of you. And would it not be better, and I can tell you what I do in a second, but like, would it not be better to just have a system of rules and consequences that aren't always natural, but allow me to look at her and say, look, we need to get out the door. If you don't get out the door, like, you know, there's no TV later tonight. And it's not natural, it's totally inorganic, but at least then I have something to to use versus being like totally stranded in this situation.
I think there's a couple points there. One of them, and I think that parents always have this, they just have this belief that they always have to do something like that. There always has to be some kind of consequence or punishment. And then we get in these moments where we are triggered, like we got to get out the door and they're struggling. So we're like, and our own kind of survival system takes over. So then we instinctively like, just got to punish them. We just got to threaten them with something to get them out the door. And there's a couple problems with that. I mean, power struggles, parents never win power struggles. They just don't. And two is it works for a minute, but going to that old analogy, give a man a fish or teach him to fish, it doesn't help you the next time that you're having problems with shoes. Having structure and sometimes just being like, I am so sorry that you don't have your shoes. I got to pick you up and we got to get in the car. That's okay to do. It doesn't necessarily mean that I now have to give them a punishment because they didn't do it. I think sometimes, parenting, I'm not going to call it gentle parenting. We're just going to call it parenting. Um, it's a lot of managing parent expectations and understanding what's developmentally appropriate too, and knowing that sometimes kids are just going to really struggle and they're going to be slow at getting out the door because they don't have a sense of that rush that we do.
That's what I was confused about, was why you would need to punish her.
So, yeah.
So because I'm thinking about, she can't find her shoe. Who among us has not been able to find our shoe? So it's understandable. And yet you have to get out the door and she doesn't want to wear another shoe. There's no punishment. It's just the task has to be accomplished. So you say to her, we need to leave. You can either put these shoes on or I'm going to pick you up and we're going to go without the shoe. And then you go. And then later, after you get to your appointment and you've had your day, You say, what can we do differently so that tomorrow you know where your shoes are?
Let me back up. This is great because there is, I really do take, I have an approach that's based on my teaching, like being a teacher. And you both might talk me out off of it or find some fatal flaws. So I think this is like 4 and above. I agree. When the kids are younger and it's easy to manhandle, like and easy to do that physical stuff, like I agree that is the Lansbury way. That's what you should do. But now that my daughter's almost 5, like picking her up and physically moving her is a highly escalating move. Like I have done it. I have tried it. Like that is, you're going from 0 to 60. So what I have done, and I did it with my 7-year-old, and now they're both sort of on the same system, is I've created a systemic approach to rules and consequences, which is essentially a 3-2-1 system. But I agree with you. Timeouts are not for me. I start, if they get to 0, then I start with a natural consequence if it's available, and if um, if I get to 0 and there is no natural consequence, I use an unnatural consequence like TV or something fun. And what ends up happening, because I did that, very aggressively early on with both kids, they know that when I get to 3 and 2, like she just put on the other pair of shoes because there was a systemic approach to this. And, I have a relatively joyful experience with my kids, similar to my teaching career. And the reality is I almost never get to 0. It's been a year. I think I've given 2 consequences in the past year. It's an annoying thing to say as a parent. Like, it's like weird to talk positively about your parenting, but that is true. Okay. Feedback.
I think that the difference between, sort of randomly doling out a consequence because you're dysregulated by your child's dysregulation, and what you're doing is you're saying, these are the expectations. And you know that if we get to this number, the consequence will be that you will not be able to have TV. Now, it might seem unrelated, but the point is everybody does it differently. There has to be flexibility in families. If in your family that works, that's okay, as long as, and here's the caveat, that she's learning the lesson, which is it's not just I'm going to do this because I might not get TV later. It's I need to learn how to get my shoes out and get out of the house. So is she learning that? And is she learning the skills to do that? So it's not just, oh, I'll only do it when I have the threat of no TV over my head. But I know that there are other reasons that I need to get out of the house. And I know the skills now to do that.
I have found that having it there, having that 3-2-1 count, having a look, like I think, like Ryan, this is interesting. I would love your thoughts on this because you're like, parents don't win power struggles, but there are power struggles. There again are dozens of power struggles every day. I don't want a shampoo. I do want shampoo. I don't want the green cup. I want the yellow cup. You're going to have the green cup. All of a sudden, there's a power struggle. I think like winning and losing is clearly like a not the right way to think about it to some extent, but there is a sense of like, yes, you are going to get shampooed. You are going to keep that cup. And I am going to give you a look that says, like, if you don't, this will end poorly for you because I am the adult. I am the authority figure. And like in all of these little moments, yes, I want to teach you why it's important to you drink your orange juice in the cup I already poured it in so we don't have to like have another dish. But also like there's just so much workflow where having that look of authority and that look of like, this will end poorly for you. It's not going to end poorly for me. I have the power. You do not. Is that horrible? Am I like,
I don't think
is
anything's
that
horrible.
bad?
I think consistency is a big piece there, right? The expectation has been set and the consistency is there. Um, I would counter what you're saying with what happens when they tell you I don't care, because those are the kids that I tend to work with. The problem with relying on these punishment strategies, especially kids like ADHD who get overly punished and overly consequenced without any of the other stuff that they need, they get to the point where they're like, I don't care. You're like, oh, I'm going to take away your TV. I don't care. My brother grew up, he'd had a point where he had nothing in his room, right? And my parents, I heard, like, overheard the conversation, like, we can't take anything else from him. What are we going to do? Right. That's the problem with the punishments, is that eventually it has to escalate. Right. You gotta hope, right? The parents that use it, they hope that they can get that look moment, but eventually there's going to be that point where they like do it. Right. And now that I've used this strategy so much and it's being called on, I am now in a position as a parent where I have to be like, do I call it? Do I now have to go more? Or do I have to kind of go back to the basics and figure out a whole new way to do this?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, parenting is hard. Parenting is hard.
Well,
It's hard. The full stop.
I will say the look
Sure.
can be very effective.
The
So
look, counting, I use counting too.
yes, well, the issue with counting that I came across as a parent was if you didn't set up the expectation in advance, they'll just let you count and you'll out count. They'll let you get through all the numbers and they're still
Yeah.
doing the thing that they're doing. So you have to set up the expectation first, which is, if I get to this number, here's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you have to make sure that it's something
Mhm.
you're comfortable doing. So that it's not, because otherwise parents will threaten all these things, especially in the moment, because you think, okay, what is the thing that I can do right now to make this other thing happen? Let me give this, 10 out of 10 consequence for this 2 out of 2 behavior. You have to think about that. But I think a look, and that's where the trust comes in though. So if you have not been doing parenting well, the look doesn't mean anything. And it has to be used sparingly and it has to be used in the right moment. So if you're just always giving the look, it's not going to mean anything anymore. But if you use it in the right moments and in the right context, you don't have to say a word. People think that a boundary is you tell somebody as an adult, um, you know, I don't like when you do that. So you can't do that anymore, right? And then the person does that, and then there's no sort of consequence. They think that it's on the other person. You can't do that to your kids. The thing is, if you yell at me, if you say to an adult, if you yell at me in this conversation, I'm going to end the conversation and we'll resume it later on. Right? That means, and if that other person yells at you, you have to literally end the conversation kindly without any kind of explosive behavior. Just, okay, you know what? You're raising your voice. Let's resume this later. And you do it every single time. But people will come to me and say, they're not respecting my boundary. Well, no, the boundary is with yourself. I have decided what I will do, and I've told them what I will do if this happens. And that's what we need to do with our kids. So if you set boundaries with your kids, you say, if this behavior happens, here is what I, as your parent, will do. So it's not incumbent on them. They can make a choice about what they're going to do, but they know exactly what you're going to do in response.
And again, I'll kind of add on to parenting is all about, you got to figure out your own stuff, because the reason that we make those big threats is because we're triggered and we are struggling with being able to manage our own anxiety and stress. But I want to add, a lot of times, especially when we talk about parenting, the big focus becomes consequences, boundaries, and all of that. But I just feel like that's not a full enough picture, right? Because it's not so much what we did in the moment, it's what we do after the moment that's most important. It's figuring out, okay, they didn't put their shoes on and we had to go through the fight and the consequences and all that kind of stuff. But when we get home and when they're calm and we have a conversation with them and we start to teach them, where do we put our shoes and how can we prevent this in the future? I had a period where I had my own when he was like 2 years old. We just started keeping his shoes in the car because it's like, we're not finding them and it's just a fight. So they're going to be in the car. We're preventing the problem sometimes. It's so much about everything that we do before the problem and after the problem that the consequence is really a small part of it, truly. But there are parents who are single parents working with, 3 kids at home and trying to work 2 jobs, and they're going to have a very different, view of what parenting is. Like, it's just going to look different to their journey to get there. Like, it doesn't mean that it's okay that, we use some of those really harsh strategies, but I think it's really important to mention that they are, like, it's going to be very different. Some of them are coming in with trauma and generational trauma and all of that, and it's going to be a harder journey for them. So for them, a lot of that work is going to be figuring out, how can I even set these systems to work for me, and it's going to look a lot of work in the very beginning because they're just trying to relearn how to even exist in this world.
And I think going along with that, so much of what triggers us as parents is feeling out of control. That when we feel out of control, we feel like we have to control our children. So if you are a single mother with 3 kids and you're working several jobs and your life is already, you don't have a lot of choice and a lot of control. And then your kids start doing all these things and it's getting in the way of the schedule and all the things that need to happen. It's really hard to figure out, you think I need to just get things in control. But the way in which we get our lives in more of a controlled situation is not by controlling our children. It's by setting up these systems so that the family functions in a certain way. So, yes, we need, again, I keep going back to the aquarium. We need the aquarium. It is not an ocean and it is not a fishbowl. And so, how do we set up the aquarium? And like what Ryan said, before the thing happens, after the thing happens, it doesn't have to take a lot of time. And that's where I think these social media people are getting it wrong and kind of really giving the impression and making parents feel like they're not good parents if they don't sit down and have these long, extended feelings conversations with their kids. It's a comment, it's a moment, it's I see you, I get it, and here's what's happening right now.
Quick question on that, Lori. Do you make a distinction between controlling kids and being in control? Like would you say it's you should be in control, but you should not be controlling, right? Because I think that's an important distinction.
Yes, yes, it is an important distinction. Being in control means you are regulated. So when we are out of control, we are dysregulated. That's when we say, okay, no TV for a month, right? We just say that in the moment. We don't even know what to do. And of course, we're not going to follow through on that. And then our kids don't trust us. They think, oh, my parent just said that. They were out of control. You need to be regulated. And so we can't always be regulated all of the time. We're human. So what do we do when we feel ourselves? You can feel it in your body. And it's like when you go from 0 to 100. That's when you really need to say, okay, the less I say right now, the better. This is not a time when you want to insert more control. It's a time when you want to step back. And maybe you erred on the side of letting something slide, but then later you can say, you know what? This didn't go well. Let's talk about that. And here's what's going to happen next time when that happens. And I agree too that I think what parents really want is like operating instructions. And the problem is, even under the same roof, you can have different siblings who have different personalities and different ways of relating to them that work best. So there's not a one size fits all with parenting. And I think that people need to remember that when, yes, it's important to learn about parenting and learn about your own reactions to things and become somewhat educated on parenting. But just because someone on the internet says something, it doesn't mean that that's going to work with your kid or with all of your kids. Parenting is relational. And so your relationship with each kid is going to be different. There will be overlap, there will be some consistency, but just like we react differently to different friends or family members or coworkers, who is the person in front of us? And it is our job as parents to get to know who that child is.
There obviously was a lot of agreement here today. And here's how I would like to end this. If you two became the co CEOs for a foundation with unlimited resources to help parents in the United States, and you were going to collaborate on either one project or a series of projects, like what do you think would be the most important thing you would do first?
I think the first thing would be to help parents understand what worked and didn't work in their own childhoods because it will inevitably get recreated somehow. We all have those moments where we say, oh my goodness, that sounds like it's coming out of my own parents' mouth. And I promised myself when I grew up, I would never say this or do this or react this way with my kids. So I think if we can support parents more, and I feel like what's happening now is that we're making them more anxious instead of supporting them.
On back of that would be, therapy, being able to get parents to be able to talk to somebody who can help them work through all of that, figure out where is all of this coming from, looking at not just my own upbringing, but my own parents' upbringing, just because that stuff trickles down, I think would be really helpful. I would love to see resources for all parents.
Universal therapy, universal parent therapy.
There's so many kids and parents out there who are just they are dying for resources, and they are in an area with nothing, and having a resource of a therapist who can understand your kid and help you understand them and understand your interaction with them, I think that that would be beautiful. And if there was no limits, I would love to buy all the social medias and create something that out there that would have a limit on how much time you can be on there, and it would have a lot more restrictions on the content and who can say what. I know that restricting speech and all of that is a struggle, but somebody
It's
who
your
is
platform, though. It's your platform. You can do what.
advice on something that they don't, and they give a lot of misinformation, which ends up creating this situation we're talking about where people feel shamed and guilt and just adds to the anxiety.
So you would, as co. Oh, you got another one, Lori.
Oh, I would add one thing. I mean, because the resources are unlimited, right?
Unlimited.
I think it would be great if every parent had someone qualified, as Ryan said, that they could call up, like a hotline, but like with people who understand, again, just parenting, generic parenting, not with any of these labels on it, and understand child development and the importance of what that relationship with your parent can look like. So that when parents are having those moments, often they feel like they can't talk to anybody about it because they're ashamed of how they reacted. So many people say, I've never yelled at my child. I just don't believe them. I just think that we all at some point have had not our finest moment. And again, that's where rupture and repair comes back. But I think that when parents who don't have resources or don't have any kind of anyone to talk to, they have these moments and then they just keep repeating them because they don't know how to do anything differently. So if in that moment they could say, I just had this interaction with my kid, I'm so upset right now. So we can help regulate the parent and then talk about, okay, let's talk about what happened. So everyone's talking about, let's talk to our children about what they're feeling and what's happening for them. But I think we need that for the parents. And then we would know how to not have to spend all this time doing it with our kids because we would be better parents.
Definitely like the answers to therapists would get like heavy on allowing for human beings to work through their own stuff, get help as they work through the stuff with their children, which makes a ton of sense. And I appreciate you both. This was, as I said, incredibly fun and helpful. And so thank you both for doing it.
That was great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for the conversation.